how does custody actually get decided? You know, you know that joke about how you really might not want to watch legislation get decided because it's like sausage making, right? You want to know the end result, but you don't really want to see the process. I kind of compare that to deciding custody. And, you know, I say that as a joke, but there is also some level of truth to it. So, really, how does custody get decided? Let's talk about it in detail. There's two ways that custody can be decided in New York State. It can be decided between the parties, either in court or outside of court, like in mediation, or just using attorneys to independently negotiate, or just between the two of them. Or it can be decided by a judge. So let's talk first about how custody could be decided outside of court. And so when I'm talking about outside of court, and deciding custody outside of court, I'm talking typically about a situation where there is no litigation pending. So, if you are in a situation where you are deciding custody outside of court, meaning there's no litigation pending, no custody petitions, no action for divorce pending, here's typically the process you're going to follow. You're going to be either talking directly with your partner or working through a mediator. If you're working through a mediator, they will take you step by step through the items that you need to address to be able to truly resolve the issue of custody for your family. And if you're working without a mediator, well, you know, the internet has a lot of information on it. And hopefully this video will help you figure out what you really need to go through in order to resolve the issue of custody without the help of a mediator. So if you're with a mediator, they will, again, walk you through the pieces that you need to address. And if you're not with a mediator, well, you got to figure those pieces out. And once those items are all resolved, if again there's no litigation pending, then you're going to have to resolve those and put them into writing. That writing is typically called a custody agreement, and then that custody agreement needs to be incorporated either into an order of custody from the family court, or it needs to be incorporated into a judgment of divorce in order for it to be enforceable as an order. You can certainly live just under the written agreement of custody, but that is, in New York State, that's just a contract. And so contracts in New York State are not enforceable in family court, which is a really important thing to be aware of, because I've had people who have entered into agreements of custody and then needed to enforce that agreement of custody and then realized, oh gosh, I can't just go file a petition for custody to enforce that agreement because it's just an agreement, it's not an order. So if you are without any litigation pending, you're going to have to not just go through the issues of custody, but also think about, well, what is the final form that we want it in? Do we want it just in an agreement, or do we want to put it into a court order? Again, a court order is enforceable in every single court in New York State because it's a court order. In New York State, we have these courts that are called limited jurisdiction courts. One such court is family court, and those courts cannot enforce agreements. They can only enforce orders. All right, so the other way that you could resolve custody without having a judge resolve it is if you are in court litigating and your attorneys are helping you to resolve it. Now that could look like you have a custody petition pending, or there's a judgment of, an action for divorce pending, and maybe there's court conferences going on, and those court conferences are settlement conferences. Potentially, though, those settlement conferences involve either the judge, or those settlement conferences involve the judge's law clerk, which is an attorney who assists the judge. And those conferences can look across the scope. They can be very, very different depending on the judge you are in front of, the county you're in, and just how things are proceeding. And, you know, I've certainly had a lot of people, my own clients, who have commented to me that, you know, it feels very roughshod, that things are being pushed down my throat. And that can be the way it feels, right? Because you've got a judge, and that judge is telling you, hey, listen, this seems to be a reasonable resolution for these people. And the concern there is, well, you haven't heard my client's testimony, or if you're an unrepresented party, you haven't heard from me, really. You know, you don't know what I have to say. Certainly you know what's in the petitions, and you know whatever the attorneys have been able to get out of their mouths in front of you, but you don't actually have any testimony in front of you to be able to make these judgment calls. And that can feel really unsettling. So that is certainly an option, or a way that custody can be decided without a judge actually deciding it, but kind of with the judge's input. The result of those matters. So if you are negotiating with attorneys with litigation pending, the results of those matters or the results of those negotiations is typically written into a custody agreement that is then incorporated into some sort of binding court order. Whether that's a binding order of custody or a judgment of divorce, it could vary depending on the litigation that you have pending, quite frankly. But if you have an action pending, more than likely it is going to resolve with some sort of order. You're not going to have the option to just resolve it with an agreement, because the order is what's necessary in order to resolve the pending litigation. And then the last way that we can resolve custody in New York State is with a judge. And that actually looks like a trial, their robes on, presiding over everybody. It's rare that custody trials actually move forward to conclusion. They absolutely happen, but it's rare. And, it's typically rare because judges and law clerks do tend to get pretty involved with the hopes of being able to have the parties reach their own resolution on custody, rather than a judge who has really no direct knowledge of your family making the call. But if nobody can agree, the judge is there to settle the disagreement. And that resolution is an order of the court. So again, that's either a judgment of divorce or an order of custody, but it's a binding order. Now, when you're going through all these different processes, you're probably thinking, well, what is it that we're actually talking about when we're trying to resolve custody? And that's a really good question. So custody in New York State is two pieces, right? We've talked about how it's legal custody and physical custody, but both pieces are resolved by what's called the best interest test. And the best interest test is a factor-based test. It is, the factors that are going to apply for your family are different. From family A to family B to family Z. Each family has different factors that are really going to be more important, but most of the time you see the following factors: parental fitness, if there's any sort of alcohol issues, drug issues, if there's any sort of anger management issues, domestic violence. So parental fitness is an issue. And whether the parties can truly manage the schedule they're talking about, right? So on that piece, we're typically talking about what are the work schedules? Where do the parties live? How far away from it are they from each other? How consistently involved in the child's life have both parents been? If one parent is in and out, that might not lead to that level of stability that children truly do need. And then another factor that is growing in weight is the factor that it has a lot of different names, but it's really which parent or parents have the ability to support the child's relationship with the other parent, right? So it's the judges really want to see that, yes, your relationship may have fallen apart as parents, but there's still a child here, and that child deserves parents that can stand in the same room with each other, not speak badly about the other parent, and not try to impact that child's relationship with the other parent. This factor, in the course of my being an attorney in New York State, has grown to be a very, very big factor. So if you're thinking about legal custody, physical custody, and how are we resolving these topics, those topics are resolved by the best interest analysis. And in New York State, one of the biggest factors is whether a parent has the ability to support the other parent's relationship with the children. And this does also expand to look at whether that parent can support the children's relationship with their extended family, right? So it is a very broad factor, and it is one that is becoming very, very influential for judges in New York State. So we've talked through the different factors, or some of the most popular ones, the most frequently seen ones. Now let's talk about what are the nuts and bolts of a custody order, right? And I think this is a really important topic because a lot of people are just sort of like, oh yes, it's a very amorphous topic of custody. What's custody going to look like? Well, the nuts and bolts of a custody order are really important, so we have to talk about that. All right, so what are the nuts and bolts of a custody order in New York State? They are the following. You have to resolve legal custody. You have to resolve physical custody. Legal custody is who's making the big legal decisions for the children. What doctors are they going to? What school are they going to? Potentially what extracurricular activities are they enrolled in? Who's making those very big decisions for them? Physical custody is literally who has them? So where are they laying their heads every single night? That's how I like to think about it, because when we're talking physical custody, we're looking at the overnight schedule. It's just easier to track overnights than it is to track like exact amounts of hours. So when you're looking at legal custody, you can resolve that in a few different ways. Legal custody in New York State has, I think, the following three main ways to resolve. First is sole legal custody, and this is very infrequently seen. Sole legal custody is typically reserved for instances where there is a serious problem that prevents the parents from being able to discuss and agree. That problem could be physical violence, that problem could be emotional control, that problem could be, one parent is just MIA, but it's very rarely seen. The second option is what's called modified joint legal custody with final say. And that's kind of what it sounds like. So it is a situation where the parents have to try to work together to resolve any legal custody issue. But if they can't, then one parent has final say. And that one parent can have final say in every legal custody area or in specified areas. And sometimes you see parent A has specified areas in extracurricular activities or religion, and parent B has medical and school. So it's not unusual to see, if there is going to be modified legal custody, it's not unusual to see that there's some sort of split. And I like to think of modified joint legal custody as like the carrot and stick approach to legal custody. The idea being, if you're good, right? If you're good and you work together, you have a say. But if you're just going to be a pain, and sometimes worse than a pain, well, the stick is going to come out. The last way to resolve legal custody in New York State is with joint legal custody. And so joint legal custody is exactly what it sounds like. You're jointly resolving these major decisions for your kids. That's legal custody. So the next topic we have to talk about in deciding custody in New York State is physical custody. So what are we considering, or what are we putting into an agreement when we're talking about physical custody of the children? There's a few main pieces and then lots of little ones. So the main pieces that you're thinking of are, what's the basic parenting time schedule? And that's the schedule that controls pretty much every single week. You can see this control throughout the entire year, or for school year and summer break, or for whatever other arrangement might work for your family. Most often, 98% of the times, you see a schedule that just controls throughout the whole year. So physical custody, the first piece you're talking about is the basic schedule. The second piece you're talking about is the exchanges. Time, what days, that type of arrangement, because you got to figure out the logistics of that basic schedule. The third thing is the holiday schedule. And for a holiday schedule, you're really looking at, are we resolving all holidays? Like, are we looking at a calendar and figuring out every federal holiday ad nauseum? Or are we looking at what are the main holidays for our family? And on this point, I think, consider a few things. Are you somebody that has federal holidays off? Then maybe you want to resolve that as to make sure that they are equally shared between the two of you. But consider how that's going to impact potentially a weekend rotating schedule, all right? Or are you a family that, we either don't have federal holidays off, or we might have them off, but we really don't, one parent still is going into work a little bit, or we really don't celebrate them. In that instance, you might just want to boil your holiday schedule down to a very simplistic major holiday schedule, and that could be whatever holidays are important to your family. Typically, it's some form of like the December holidays or Ramadan holidays, or 4th of July, Memorial Day, Labor Day, things like that. Thanksgiving, Easter, the major holidays that are important to your family. And keep in mind that sometimes those major holidays could be ones that aren't recognized by the calendar, right? So maybe it's the day that you guys all make applesauce every single year. I have no idea, but you can put those types of things in if there's agreement on the other side. All right, the fourth thing to be aware of in a physical custody schedule is the vacation time. So you really want to make sure that vacation time is afforded to both parents, because my guess is you're going to want to be able to take vacations. The fifth thing, and this is where we start to get into some of the more minor details, the fifth thing is thinking through, how are the school year breaks going to be shared? Are we going to alternate them? Are we going to keep the schedule the same? What makes sense for our family? And then a few other smaller minor things are days of significance, which I consider to be like Mother's Day, Father's Day, children's birthdays, parent birthdays if you want to get into it. Things like those types of holidays or important days. And then the last things to be aware of are just other things that are logistical concerns. So you might want to put in provisions about providing an itinerary from the other parent if they're going to travel with the child. You might want to put in terms about international travel, who holds a passport, a lot of other things that could come into play or be very important to you guys in the future. So when you're coming together and figuring out a custody schedule, you really want to think not just right now, but 5 years, 10 years down the road, what are the pieces that are going to be important to us at that point? All right, we covered a lot in this video and it's pretty lengthy, so I'm going to wrap up right here, but I just want to do a quick summary. If you are talking about creating a custody schedule in New York State, what are we talking about? So, creating a custody schedule in New York State requires the following. It requires resolution on legal custody, requires a resolution on physical custody. And when you're resolving physical custody, that means that you are also touching on your typical basic parenting time schedule, the exchanges, dates, times, locations, holiday schedule, what holidays are going to be followed. Is there going to be a vacation time provided to either parent? What are the logistics surrounding that vacation time? How far in advance does the parent have to notify a vacation? What itinerary has to be provided? And then lastly, you're going to want to look at like school year breaks, summer break. How are those things handled? Is summer break going to be handled differently than the regular school year parenting time schedule? And when you're thinking through all of these pieces, take your time to think through the logistics of them, because the logistics is where I see things fall down every single time. I hope this video was really helpful to you. If you have any questions or you need more detailed or specific information, I completely understand. Custody is a very complicated topic, although it can seemingly be very easy. So it's always helpful, at least in my view, to get some individualized legal advice. And if you want that, just reach out to us. We are happy to schedule a consult so that you can have the information you need to move forward with your life.